Welcome to the Spinning Back Clique, where each week we take a quick spin through the biggest news in MMA. Gorgeous George on the con here, and look at the distinguished panel we have for you today. Sin City and Toronto in the house. We got Goze from MMA Junkie Radio. The guy's got almost 3,100 episodes under his belt. He knows what's up. On my personal Mount Rushmore of guys that can break down fights, it's the fight analyst, Dan Tom, and rounding out the cast, the 2019 World MMA Awards nominee for Best Journalist, Mike Bohn. We got 4 great topics. Let's dig in. Former champion Holly Holm painted a masterpiece on Saturday night, and it came at the cost of rising Mexican star Irene Aldana. What's next for the preacher's daughter? That's my question to you guys. And don't forget, on the main card as well, Germaine de Randamie, also former champion, had a nice win. Should she be a part of unpacking that whole division? Go ahead, 3 minutes on the clock. Goze, you go first.
I mean, come on. Holly Holm's performance was masterful, like you said. It was one of the best of her career. I can't say that it was the best because, anybody who's ever followed Holly Holm knows that Ronda Rousey fight's probably what we're all going to remember her for. But after that, now, this is the moment, I think, where we could say Holly Holm has put everything together, pieced all of the arts together, and given us something that we need. And that one thing is, if you're going to fight Amanda Nunes again, which we have to imagine that's what Holly Holm wants to do, you have to give us something that makes us feel as if this fight is going to be different. And she blended all the arts together beautifully. She stuck to her game plan. I just thought it was a great performance. As far as what's next for her, here's the situation. George mentioned it. Germaine de Randamie, kind of in the same situation as her. I say, why not take those two? Instead of picking off another contender, make them fight each other. Whoever wins could be next. I like that better.
All right, Young Bohn, you're up next, man. What you got?
Yeah, I think that's 100% the clear fight to make is Holm versus de Randamie too. You look at the history between them. Obviously, they had that fight at UFC 208, I think February 2017. A little bit of a controversial fight there. De Randamie hits Holm after the bell. A little bit of a controversial decision, all that kind of stuff. So I think it's perfect time to run them back. As Goze said, you're not matching them up with another person where they can potentially pick off a rising contender. Like Aspen Ladd is a fight out there that was matched up with Holm earlier this year. It didn't materialize, but I think that's a fight that doesn't really make sense because you're kind of potentially ruining another up-and-coming fighter who's really promising, like you did with Aldana there, at least for the time being. So that fight makes all the sense in the world to me at this point. It's a title eliminator. Both of them want their rematch with Amanda Nunes, or I guess in de Randamie's case, a third fight. So put them together, see who is going to get there at the kind of twilight of their career, see who's probably never going to get another shot at gold. Perfect matchmaking.
I like it. All right, Dan, Tom, what's on your mind?
The Holm de Randamie rematch makes sense, but I both want to warn people and express some interest in the sense that I warn anybody that is thinking that's a good move for Holly Holm. Both prominent media and even commentators who have since corrected themselves in fairness have given GDR a very unfair rap. It was referee Todd Anderson that should be at full blame for not getting in between the fighters. It's one of my least favorite referee mistakes, as it usually falls on the fighter unfairly. So I'll be really curious to see what the betting odds are, because I believe it was a clear GDR win. And with GDR showing new skills like submission skills, I don't know how much Holly Holm's going to want to dust off her new grappling skills. So I'm not sure about that. And I will mention Megan Anderson, even though people are not giving her a shot in daylight, if she's able to score an upset, I would not be surprised if an immediate rematch actually isn't booked with Nunes starting a new family. Could Holm maybe move up to 145? That's a wild card worth looking at.
Yeah, you're right. We got to give respect to Megan Anderson. She does have that fight lined up, and she's a quality opponent. All right, let's move on to the next one. UFC President Dana White said we were close to having Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor at the next Ultimate Fighter in season in the coaching role. Nurmagomedov decided against it after McGregor disclosed some private messages between himself and Dana White. Now, guys, that would have been massive. Should the UFC pursue that again, give these guys a nudge? Come on, let's do it, because it would be big. Or do you move on to another pairing? And if so, what pairing? 3 minutes on the clock. Dan, Tom, lead off.
Man, you guys know I'm not a big fan of tough at all. I kind of tuned out. The last, one I watched fully was probably the heavyweight season. That being said, as contrarian, as cold as I am on the topic, I will say that that McGregor pairing obviously catches some attention if they could get both parties to the table, which is hard to do. It's been volatile to say the least between Conor and Nurmagomedov. So for whatever that's worth, coming from a contrarian like myself, I think that's the thing you still stick to, you still fight for. It seems like ESPN Plus is really demanding the UFC produce content. So we'll see if they're really behind the gun. That'll tell you if they go with somebody else, because I don't think there's anybody else to go to, especially when you wave that piece of candy out there.
All right, next up is Goze. Goze, weigh in, man. What do you want? What do you want to do? You want to preserve this thing or move in another direction?
I mean, who wouldn't want to tune in and see those two week after week go at it? But the reality is this, guys, like Dana White basically handed down a sentencing. All right. I don't see him going back on that. And really, at the end of the day, as attractive as those two being on there week after week is, would it have worked? I mean, at some point, chaos may erupt. And here in Las Vegas, of all places, we don't need Conor McGregor to get in any more trouble. So really, for me, I think you have to shelf that. That's gone. It's not going to happen. So you look to somebody else. And if I'm going to look to somebody else, I want to maybe replicate what you have there with Conor and Khabib, and that's heat. And if you're going to bring heat, how about Colby Covington and Jorge Masvidal? Put them on week after week, jawing at each other, which leads to them eventually fighting. I think that would be great TV. I'm totally into that.
I like it. You guys are killing it. All right, Mike Bohn, what kind of ideas do you got?
Yeah, Goze actually stepped right on my idea there. Actually, I think Colby Covington would be a good solution if you want to bring in someone else. I mean, I think the element of him, there's the whole, is he putting on a character? What is he actually like behind the scenes? If you could see Colby Covington working with younger fighters, like how does he act towards them? All that kind of stuff. I think that would just make for compelling television there. You could do it against Masvidal. You could maybe do it against Usman if he beats Burns. There's some options there. I like the Masvidal idea just because you're not tying up a title fight, and I think that's been one of my biggest issues with Tough over the years is them just taking fights off the table. And to circle back to the original question, that's why I don't want to see Conor and Khabib do this. We've had like 3 or 4 undisputed lightweight championship fights, the glamour division of the sport, the so-called most stacked weight class, and we barely get to see this undisputed title defended. So I don't want to see Khabib have to wait 5 months, 6 months for another title defense after this. I want to see that title defended after him and Gaethje unify and go forward from there. We don't need to see him and Conor continue beefing out. We need to see 8, 10, 12 weeks of that. They hate each other. We know it. And I think that would just get pretty dark. We don't need to go back to that well for that long.
All right, good job, fellas. We need to get you guys in some reality television. You guys have some great ideas here. Let's move on to the next question. Jon Jones and Israel Adesanya, man, they've been brawling on social media. Moms, dads, it's getting personal. So much so that Dana White, however, says this is now the fight to make. Do you guys agree with White or just need to simmer a little bit? 3 minutes on the clock. Mike, you're up first.
Well, I think it is the fight to make, and Dana said as much, but he didn't say it's the fight to make right now. And I would agree with him on that sense. You can let this thing go for a bit. It seems like Adesanya still wants to do some work. He wants to defend that middleweight title against Jared Cannonier, possibly Robert Whittaker again, Darren Till, Jack Hermanson, etc. There's some good fights for him there, but I think the Jones one is the one we all want to see eventually. It's the fight that is going to be, the biggest box office attraction for both fighters, for the UFC, for the fans, all that kind of stuff. So we need to see that eventually. I just don't think we're going to get there right at this moment. I want to see Jon Jones go to heavyweight. I want to see him finally dip his toe into that weight class, not coming down and fight a guy who's moving up to 205. I assume that's where that fight would take place, would be light heavyweight. So I do think it's absolutely a must-see fight, a fight that we want to watch happen, but it's just not the time for it right this moment. Hopefully we can get there with both guys continuing to win, and it's just the absolute mega fight we want to see.
All right, so Mike Bohn saying let's tap the brakes a little bit, but for sure we want to have it as it goes. How about you?
I tend to agree here with Mike Bohn. I think it's a fight that's going to happen. There's no way around it. They've said things that you just can't go back on. So whether it happens in the cage or outside of the cage, it's going to happen. All right. What I don't want is for it to drag on as long as Colby Covington and Tyron Woodley did, where when you finally get the fight, they just seem like different fighters. I don't want that to happen. So when you look at the things that have been going on, Jon Jones kind of bringing up Jan Blachowicz' name led me to believe that maybe a possible move to heavyweight isn't what's on his mind. So I don't really know where this guy, his head is at, but what he does need is a partner in crime for these fights. And he would have that with Israel Adesanya. It would make us want to tune in to see some kind of resolution to something like that. So really, the move to heavyweight can happen at any time. I think this fight needs to happen sooner than later. It just doesn't need to be Jon Jones' next move.
All right. Dan, Tom, what kind of thoughts do you share on this topic?
Not sure what the timer says, so I'll try to keep it short. Basically, I was of the opinion of both Mike and Goze. Hey, I'm okay with waiting. I've recently been changed the other way, not so much because of the heat. That's not my number one selling point, but it makes sense between Adesanya's skill projection and Jones's arguable deterioration. Furthermore, we don't see it next. We're going to have to wait arguably about 3 more matchups because you're going to have to account for 3 divisions. Cannonier facing Adesanya, Blachowicz and Santos, Teixeira sorting things out at light heavyweight, and Ngannou finally getting his deserved shot at Stipe Miocic. We could be running into another Anderson Silva GSP situation where we actually miss the bridge if we don't get it now.
All right, Dan, you have a pretty good internal clock. We're pretty close. I do want to say, though, I want to add that new stadium over here in Las Vegas, that's where the fight has to happen. So I'm feeling you guys on not now, but let's get there sooner rather than later. I want to see it in that stadium. All right, guys, the last topic of the day. Quietly on the prelims, Carlos Condit got a win over Court McGee, 27s across the board. Social media was buzzing as the natural-born killer pulled off the upset, according to the sportsbook. Now, some media wanted him to sail off into the sunset, with a win. Great way to finish out a great career. However, others were already lining him up versus future opponents. What say you, fellas? What do you want to do with Carlos Condit, the former WC and UFC welterweight champ? Goze, you lead off.
Well, I think in this scenario, guys, the guys that go after me are going to come up with some pretty good names. So I'm going to be crazy Goze, and I'm going to think way outside the box. Here's what I got for you. Good Carlos Condit performance, some vintage Carlos Condit, but I think we're all pretty sure that he's not going to be contending for a title anytime soon. That's why I'm going crazy Goze. And what crazy Goze is going to pitch out there is this. Think about this. Dan Hardy has never really said that he's completely done. He's always left the door open that he wants to come back for one more fight. Now, should he pass medicals and go through all that and be okay, why not a fight like that? Just kind of 2 guys that were big in the sport, have them fight. There's nothing really on the line, but I'm sure Dan Hardy wants to get that one back. I think it would be fun. I think they could both sell it. Picture that. The faces they've made in that stare down. I'm down for that fight.
All right, that's not too crazy. Mike Bohn, who do you like?
Goze's idea there is pretty nice, especially now that we also have the visual. I don't know if you saw the people making like the side-by-side graphics of Hardy and Condit staring each other down years ago, and then them standing in the octagon together with Dan Hardy being the post-fight interviewer. So to see him back in there again, fighting, that'd be cool if Hardy can make it back. But I think there's the very clear, obvious one that Matt Brown brought up after the fight, wanting to fight Carlos Condit. That one's long overdue. Carlos Condit said, I'm down. If he can make it this time, put the man in some bubble wrap. These 2 have been scheduled to fight twice before. It didn't happen. An action fight, 2 of the most violent guys in the history of this weight class at welterweight. I think we need to see that, and it's just the perfect kind of thing for where they are at this stage in their career. They've both semi-retired, come back, won some fights, lost some fights. I think right now is the time to match them up. You're not feeding them to a 26-year-old killer like you did with Diego Sanchez and Jake Matthews, something like that. These are the type of fights that at this stage of the career of a Carlos Condit, a Matt Brown, they should be fighting these type of matchups. So I think right there, it's right in front of you. No need to get too nuts. Just book it.
All right, and we'll finish up with Dan. Tom, Dan, you watch a lot of footage, man. I know the wheels are turning. Who do you want to see the natural-born killer with, or should he just retire?
I was wrong on the pick this weekend. However, I wasn't wrong on my analogy for picking against Carlos Condit because he is lucky in this discussion, guys. He's in a welterweight, a class where, as my analogy would give, there's a bunch of dudes who still hang around the high school campus, even though they already graduated. You're like, what are you doing here? Now, Carlos Condit proved his worth. He's not just trying to look cool. He looked great this last Saturday. So for that reason, I actually wouldn't want to see him against Hardy, though I really like that thinking outside of the box against Goze. I'm on the board with Mike Bohn as far as what already seems like it makes sense in Matt the Immortal Brown. But however, if I'm going to draw from the class of dudes hanging around campus perhaps a little too long, I'm going to actually go with Tyron Woodley. There was a bit of controversy with the injury of that rematch. Obviously, we're doing a win-loss and a lot of losses that Woodley is coming off of. Not traditional matchmaking, but I want to see the matchmaking stay within that proverbial class. Give me Woodley versus Condit if I can't have Condit Brown.
I like what you're onto there, man. Good pull there with the Woodley matchup. All right, guys. That is a wrap for this week. Big thanks, obviously, to Goze, Dan, Tom, and Mike Bohn. Follow those guys, man. They're some of the best in the business. And, of course, a quick shout-out to my man, Cold Coffee. Keep it locked on MMA Junkie throughout the week. We will see you here in about 7 days here on the Spinning Back Clique.